Call the meeting to order of the Economic Development Committee. Please take the roll.
Calling the roll, Mr. Shrine.
Here.
Mr. Tuma.
Here.
Ms. Stevens. Ms. Stevens is absent at the moment. Ms. Baker. Here. Ms. Simon. Ms. Simon is absent at the moment. We have a quorum. Also like the record to reflect that Councilman Miller is also in attendance.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone signed in for public comment today?
No, Mr. Chair, no one is signed in.
Okay, very good. We have minutes from the last meeting of June 24th. Has everybody had a chance to review the minutes from the 24th meeting? Hearing no comments whatsoever, the chair will move that we approve the minutes. Is there a second? It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion in regards to the June 24th? Hearing none, all in favor of approval of the minutes of the June 24th meeting, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Minutes are approved. If we can read, we have one matter that requires action, and we have another item that did not necessarily make it on here, but I know that everybody's prepared for the loan program. Is that a correct statement? Okay, very good. All right, so if we can read the one item into the record. I know we've already had hearings already on this matter.
Resolution number 2019-0139, adopting the 2019 Economic Development Plan in accordance with Section 7.05 of the Cuyahoga County Charter and Section 801.01 of the Cuyahoga County Code.
Okay, is there someone here to speak in regards to this? I think Mr. Carter, I think, was going to give it, what's that? It's going to get approved. I have all my confidence in the world. I see a written record of July 29th. I didn't want you to go to all the trouble to prepare it and then not have a chance to present it, so.
And members of the committee.
Oh, that's fine. It doesn't make any difference. We'll pick it up. Tell you what, as long as no one has any objection, we're here for the duration. So
Okay.
let's pick up on the loans first, and we'll come back. Even though we read it into the record, we'll come back and pick it
Okay,
up
that'll work.
afterwards. So
Thank you, sir.
We'll adjust our program. We can be very flexible in economic development.
That's the order of economic development, is flexibility, being audible ready. Mr. Chairman, Ted Carter, Chief Economic Development and Business Officer for Cuyahoga County. Thank you for the opportunity to brief you on Cuyahoga County's economic development loan portfolio and give further information on the 2019 update to the Cuyahoga County 5-year economic development plan. In my testimony, I will first discuss the current state of our complex and dynamic economic development loan portfolio. Second, I will review our current economic development funding activity and pipeline as requested. I will then outline the priorities for implementation of the 2019-2020 5-year economic development plan. I will then call on Paul Hurdick, our Director of Business Intelligence and Interim Deputy Chief, to give additional information related to the 5-year plan with respect to metrics that was requested. The Economic Development Loan Portfolio. On April 2nd, 2019, I sent County Council a memo providing a comprehensive update on the department's dynamic economic development loan portfolio. The memo provided a summary of the portfolio data based on the loan portfolio management team's extensive validation, review, and reconciliation processes. As we reconcile this portfolio, we found that a significant number of loans were made under the third-party administered loan programs that were intentionally designed to encourage prudent risk-taking by entrepreneurs and to further spur innovative technology adoption by startup companies so that they could then leverage the county loan to raise additional capital. This is a current focus of active discussions within the county's economic development ecosystem at the moment, how to spur innovation and what is the appropriate use of public sector capital to instigate that innovation. These high-risk loan programs were the North Coast Opportunity Technology Fund, which was supported by Magnet, and the North Coast Opportunity Technology Fund, which was supported by Jumpstart, the New Product Development Fund, which was supported by Magnet, and the WECO Microloan Fund. Nearly 50% of the loans, in terms of the number of loans in the portfolio, are associated with these programs. These 150 third-party loans represent a total of 8.3% of the portfolio dollars dispersed. I would be remiss in not mentioning, however, that some significant successes have occurred as a result of the county's participation in the development of these new business and innovation endeavors and the support of these funds. For example, the North Coast Opportunities Fund successfully supported Paragon Robotics, which is active in engineering and advanced manufacturing. The new Product Development Fund successfully supported COTSWorks, a global company supporting the aeronautics and defense industries with its headquarters in Highland Heights. Our loans to both companies are performing and in good standing. Now that we have completed our review and verified our records, I can confidently provide the following. The total number of loans in the portfolio dating back to 1998, more or less, is 304. Total amount dispersed in connection with all 304 loans is $106 million. The number of third-party loans, which I've already referenced, 150, equal to 49.3% of the entire portfolio. Total disbursement to third-party loan recipients is $8.8 million, equal to 8.3% of our full portfolio that I referenced earlier, $5.8 million, and that in those programs is currently outstanding. The number of third-party loans delinquent, 90 of the 150, equal to 60% of all third-party loans. By contrast, the 154 loans provided by the county to the region's business community through its other more traditional direct economic development lending, representing 5 different programs, all of which went through our credit committee, the CCCIC, have a lower delinquency rate of 12.3%. 19 of these 154 loans are past due. Lastly, we currently have 58 loans in collection status. Several times over the past 36 to 40 months that we've been reporting out on this issue, Mr. Chairman, you've asked, can we identify all loans that have either personal or corporate guarantee? 87 of the loans have one or both of a corporate or personal guarantee, and we can provide that information to you as well.
As long as we're on that subject, of the 58, how many have personal guarantees of the 58 that are in collection right now?
Let me just check with our loan portfolio manager. I don't know that off the top of my head.
Because that's why I was asking for the personal guarantee side, because those are the ones that have.
So they'll pull that information if we have it here. Otherwise, we'll get back to you.
Okay, that's why we have the ability to go after those. And if
Yeah.
they're delinquent, then
Right. And the variance is. those
delinquent
three-
means delinquent, not just late in payment. Is that what we're saying?
Right. So we've now established through our loan policies and procedures manual that delinquent is 90 days past due.
Okay. Thanks.
Nearly 50% of these, no, I've already covered that. So lastly, we currently have 58 loans in collection status. While this significant improvement is encouraging, my team and I remain committed to continue practicing high diligence, active stewardship of the portfolio and implementation and adherence to the policies and procedures we've now implemented and adopted, which was not the result when I arrived here in 2016. The key results of our work are significant and include the following. So before you in your written testimony, you'll see a list, but I'm not going to go through all of those. Let me highlight what we think are the most important. One, I've segregated the loan servicing and loan origination functions and created a standalone loan portfolio management team reporting to me. We meet weekly, and I get weekly status reports on the condition of the portfolio. We've collected an additional $52,000 owed through as a result of the diligent review and correction of past improper billings. We finalized and adopted written loan policies and procedures, which was a principal critique of the IG, and that was done 16 months ago. We now have a complete inventory of our loans and can report consistently. Another critique was by the IG was that our job compliance review and reporting was inconsistent. There is now a specific function within the office that does that regularly. And finally, we have posted to our website on a semi-annual basis the active loan list, and that has now been done since the beginning of 2017. And so we have now transmitted our semi-annual update to the technology office, so that is now in the process of being posted on the website. So that was also something that the Inspector General found deficient.
Staying with your list, did all active loan participants, we also were missing documents, as I recall. Are all documents now in agreement with with the borrower that they understand what the loan is and that we have the loans on file and they're agreeing with all the terms and conditions of the loans, because I know there were some gaps in documentation.
I'm going to be careful about saying all, Mr. Chairman. I will say that we know what documents are missing, and we've identified those and we've engaged borrowers to rectify that as appropriate.
Okay, so some of our borrowers are not signed off on what they owe as far as
There's
complete
still
agreement?
some discrepancies, but the good news is we've reached out to the borrowers. In almost every instance, there's a dialogue going with, as a result of what we think they owe, what their records show they owe, and sometimes because of documentation missing on our part, we work through that process. So, as you know, when we started this process, we didn't know where the loan documentations were. So every loan that we're aware of, we've been able to track down, document, make sure that there is a hard copy, and also that hard copy information is included in Portfolio, which is our loan management system.
I guess I'm struggling with every loan we're aware of. Oh, those are words that don't give me a warm fuzzy. Every loan, period, should be the end of the sentence, has documentation to support it. And if we don't, then what are we doing to close that gap up there to make sure we've got, the borrower knows, you owe me $1, it's due on such and such a date, here's the interest rate, and everybody's in agreement as to what those terms and conditions are. That was, I think and I understand your predecessors left some gaps. Those are gaps we were trying to fill.
Yeah. I'm not going to be categorical in responding to you, Mr. Chairman, although you will press me.
At least we have an understanding. It's right.
No, we've had,
Yeah.
as we've gone through this process where we try to make categorical statements, we've had an instance where, loans were suddenly found, as an example. And so we've had to add those, reconcile that, put them into our system. So because the record keeping was so poor and sloppy, there may be instances where a loan appeals that we're not aware of. But what we have done exhaustively is since the beginning of this new government, we've gone back and looked at every authorization that the council has made or the BOC and correlated that to documents. So that's where we have a high degree of confidence. Stuff going back into the late 90s, that's a little more problematic. So to be categorical to your question, I'm not prepared to say that definitively, so I'll stop there.
The 186 active loans with an outstanding principal balance of $61 million. Do we have paperwork to support every one of those 186 active loans? I'm getting a shaking of the heads in a positive tone from your support team. Okay, so there's not a single one of those 86 that we couldn't go through, find the folder, just like I guarantee the guys at the end of the street have that for every loan. Everything that the bank loans, there'll be a support piece of paper signed off on it.
If I could just say that.
Sure, just put your name on the record, please.
Brian Edwards. Everything that's in Portfolio system of record, which is the data is generated from, is there as a result of having the comprehensive set of loan documents and then applying those into Portfolio as they should have been originally. So that balance is based on having every loan in there, we have all the documentation on it. If we're missing certain key integral parts to it, it's not in the system from a standpoint because we're still trying to find and locate those documents.
That's the 186,
Of the 186, we have all the documentation to support it.
100%.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And of the 304, then I assume the delta between the 304 and the 186 is where we still have some questions. Is that where?
Some of the loans that go back to the early 90s, we from a standpoint of review and documentation, those had been retired. I'm sorry, the debt had been paid and the loan had been paid off in the early 2000s. So to say, do we have those records? Yes, but were they, was there any point in opening it up, reviewing, going back after we've released all the collateral and things like that?
That was going to be the next
Yes.
question. We've released, the UCC filings are all released. We've taken everybody off the,
And in cases where, we used some of the errors of the past in our benefit to where if a loan was not paid off or was paid off, but mortgages, et cetera, liens were not released, then we would then try and leverage that into reconciling it to,
Oh, yeah,
we
yeah.
use that to leverage.
that's
So,
the
yes,
purpose
sir.
of the security.
Yep.
But as long as they've been paid.
If it's been
As a
released-
borrower, you would expect the county should do its part to release.
Correct. And if
any-
it was
any-
released, there's no recourse, from our part as far as that.
Okay, so it's still, sounds like there are still a few gaps between the 304 and the 186 where we don't have paperwork, some of which have been satisfied. Those are not on our worry list, but there's some that we're still trying to catch up.
Yeah, I believe, talking to my colleague, there's about 8 that we're,
Oh,
yeah, that we're still trying to track
we're
down.
making
and find
great
out.
progress. then.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt, but
No, that's
I'm just trying to track the numbers back to the paperwork, to the
That's-
documentation, to, where are we at? Sure, as long as I've thoroughly interrupted his presentation.
No, that's fine,
Would you
Mr. Chairman. That's what,
anticipate-
we're much further ahead than I can remember
Oh.
3 years ago not being able to have any answers, right?
Right.
And
Right.
I
Much
mean,
better.
clear,
If we're down to 8, I can almost assume that there are other institutions in town that, as a percentage of this is, we're down to 2 or 3%. That's pretty negligible from where we started a couple years ago. Yes, ma'am. Ms.
Just a
Baker.
question on I hear that you're down to 8. Are there any of the 304 loans that we just can't locate and we had to write off? Is there any of those that are just too, they're just out of business, there's no
I'll
trail?
let Brian come back up. You know the answer to that off the top of your head? If not, we'll get back to you, Councilwoman. You understand her?
I would think there
Yeah,
would
I
be.
believe the statement was if you could just repeat it, I'm sorry.
I just, of the 304, and I understand there's still 8 that you're investigating, and 186 are active, but are there, within the 304, any that we just can't locate, that they're just too,
Sure.
too loose, too,
Yeah,
maybe
they're-
out of business, filed
Yeah.
bankruptcy, whatever?
So to the first part of your question, yes.
Okay.
To the second part, have we given up? No. And to the third, have we terminated and written any off? The answer is no.
Really?
Correct, yes. We want to make sure we follow the policies and procedures not established by the department, but codified in the code as it relates to who has the authority to write off loans.
Okay.
So what we are doing is identifying those, trying to go through as much data as we can of documentation so we can. We may think somebody owes us this much, but once we finally have all the information, see what was done, they may not owe us anything.
Do you have your arms around perhaps the highest risk and the most unlikely? So we're not estimating a return that it's probably not going to come?
Yeah, and I mean, it's subjective to our, esoteric world and based on what we've identified and kind of what we know about the project overall. If it happened in 2000 and it's 2019 and the project never was done, I don't think we're
Right.
gonna find evidence of repayment, but I don't want to state that we're giving up by any means. And we've specifically set the end of the year, December 31st, 2019, to effectuate the final piece of the IG, which is a good request, is the hard close. And the reason we put it off to the end of the year is because we want to get as much information on these loans with deficient documentation into the system. So in the event we find them, get it in, we don't have to open the hard close to close it back again, because then there's no point in having that for an accounting function.
So by the end of the year, you'll know of the 304 loans, where exactly you are on all that. That's your goal.
Correct, that's the goal. Yes.
But they already know where they are with the 186. They know that some of the 304 have already been paid off and satisfied.
We're just hoping to give you a better update by the
We
end
know
of the
that 8, we're looking for documentation, which those are the ones that are gonna be most susceptible. And there's gonna be some you're gonna write off that are in the delinquent category that are gonna go bad. I mean, that's what, not every loan in every institution is successfully paid back.
Just like to know what they are, that's all. We identified 8, we identified 186, we know we started with 304.
Yeah.
What's,
So
there's
just
a gap in there,
Just to clarify, the 304 are the total number of loans that reside in Portful.
right?
And those include paid off loans. So the 186 as of June 30th, we actually just had another loan paid off officially in the third party, so we're seeing better growth, but those represent what's still outstanding. And that's, that's what we have a firm grip on.
Okay.
I know you said you had some in collection that are over 90. Do you have an aging of what those 58 are?
We could get that to you as far as I don't off the top of my head what they are, but they're significant in that.
Are we talking about years that they're behind past that 90-day window, or are they the 91 days?
There's one that jumps to mind that is over a year, and then we can get you the aging of the rest of those.
Yeah, should they-
We're gonna be cautious about disclosing those here. We're happy to meet with you privately, just so that we don't embarrass or put the businesses in an undue position, but we are engaged with these borrowers actively, and as a result of that, you know, we have borrowers who are paying, their business conditions have changed, and so Sona can get us the actual number of loans that have been paid off proactively in the last 18 months. So the bottom line is having a separate team focused on this, engaging the businesses proactively and consistently. So when we started this, we weren't invoicing at all.
Right.
And so a lot of discrepancies is, you know, we're telling the business, you owe us 10. They say, well, we think we owe you 2 based on the paperwork. So we've rectified where we have discrepancies in loan documents. And so that's why these payoffs are starting to happen, and the position is in a better condition. But we will get you the aging.
Well, that's just the basic, that's just
No,
basic
so-
accounting function. You
Yeah.
just, you take 58, you figure out how many days they're late, and it gives you your aging, and just,
No,
that's,
it's the good news to everyone on this committee, and I convey it to the council as well, is that Portfolio is now a system, not only a system of record, but a useful database, so that this isn't just sorting through 5 or 6 different spreadsheets. This is all generated internally into reports that we can identify that thing.
someplace in here, Mr. Carter, is there, how many ones of that 304 have actually been paid off? So they shouldn't even be on our discussion list, to be honest. The fact you've got them in your records is just history at this point in time.
Yeah.
It's not an outstanding debt out there.
But it's still a record, historical, so we just keep everything in there from a perspective of.
I would even, as far as the 304, I'd love to know how many are already paid for and off the worry list, because they're irrelevant as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I believe,
We'll get them.
based on our, yeah. We
Yeah,
cover that in our weekly meetings.
we are, just to your point about, you know, going through the system and deleting, you know, we've set up a protocol with Inspector General, so we just want to make sure that we honor, you know, which ones we are taking out of the system. Let me just,
He can't be worried about the ones that are paid off. None of us are.
Chair, that,
I thought that there was,
Part of the
those were active
186.
loans. Is what, I
part of the
interpret
186, weren't some of those also paid off?
No, no.
Oh,
you know, those are the
Misunderstood.
loans
Okay.
where people still owe the county.
Those are our active
Some-
loans
yeah,
right now.
some
That's our
amount of
portfolio
money.
right
all right, sorry.
now.
So that's the distinction between the 304 and the 186.
Right.
Before I close on the loans, I guess I would just also say that, you know, we have, I know that the IG also reports to members of this committee, so we've been in constant contact with his office on the progress. So I think we are down to 2 issues that he is concerned about.
Okay.
One is, and he can verify this, and so the only reason why I'm gonna articulate it publicly is because we talked about it via email, is the searchability of our database. And so from his point of view, he didn't think that it met the standards that are outlined in the county code. We think we've resolved that issue with our Office of Innovation, where there's satisfaction around how that's defined. And then the last one is, which he hasn't given us a definitive yes or no, because I don't think he's done his semi-annual update, is this hard close issue. So he's good with it being done December 31st or by December 31st, but how we conduct and execute that. So that would be the remaining issue. So I think he will then be satisfied, once that hard close is done, with the data that we presented, that we are in a position of closure with the hard close. I can now say that the loan portfolio review, validation, and reconciliation project has been perfected to the standard established by the executive and the benchmarks that he and the Inspector General established. I am satisfied that we can answer questions from the executive, this committee, and any member of the public. We'd be happy to do a portfolio demonstration for this committee privately. These results have been achieved through the doggedness, determination, and commitment of this team. This team deserves an enormous amount of credit and recognition for their commitment to excellence, professionalism, and dedication. I would also like to thank this committee and council staff for your patience, partnership, and support over the last 40 months.
Is it your belief that if there are folks who are delinquent in their payments to the point where we're actually pushing for collection their past 90 days, they're into the 20s, the 180s, that's private information? that could not be disclosed?
My preference would be,
Unfortunately, we don't have,
yeah, we
don't
would
have
be
the
happy
legal
to
counsel.
meet with you all privately and disclose. I would not want that publicized to the detriment of the business. Some of these businesses are, still trying to make a go of it. And so, they have other investors and creditors that they may or may not have disclosed their delinquency to the county, to their other investors. So that would be my preference. Now, whether that's a matter of law or I won't speak to that, but
just asking, should it ever come down to that you have to turn these over to collection, that's gonna be a public piece of information, so they're not gonna be entitled to any protection at that point in time, and I question at some point if they're failing to make their obligations at some time, that it would clearly show up as a record, on.
yeah, at some point, our office is charged with helping business grow while also collecting on this, on the obligation they owe the county.
We've done
So
our
just
part by
don't-
loaning the money. It's their part their obligation is to pay it. Hate to be so subtle, but that's what, that was supposed to be a win-win on both sides.
No disagreement, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions on the loan portfolio? Anything where we are? From where we were a year and a half ago, we have made monumental strides. I'd love to find out the last 8, love to find out who's paid off of that 304. I'd love for you to tell us that a major portion of that, and then that the delta is a small number that we're trying to chase, and it sounds like we're trying to work up paperwork. Are the 8 before the new government or the 8 after the new government?
Yeah, if you don't know, we'll get back and check.
Primarily but there are maybe 1 or 2 in there, if 1 or
Okay.
2, but we'll get you the hard data and
Okay,
everything.
the 1 or 2, chase that like there's no tomorrow.
It's,
I understand things happened in the previous administration, but this is the new government, and we should not have any gaps in the new government since we started up 10 years ago. I'd love to be able to make sure we say 100% there are no open gaps, and we nail those 2.
Sure.
If I may, given the, all that you've done and moving forward with the new government and its loan policies, do you see things slowing down because you may be scrutinizing perhaps a little bit more of the loans that we award? Or, I mean, I guess it could backlash on us that if we're so careful that we don't engage with companies perhaps that are a little riskier than others. Do you see any downfall to perhaps not loaning where we may have before, only because we have to be answerable for the payback?
It's a very pertinent question. I would say, I'd like to think more about your question, but the short answer is this is an active discussion around innovation and startup that I referenced in my testimony. So
Okay.
where should we take risk? What kind of risk should it be? What kind of companies are we supporting? So I think that is an evolving issue that we need further thought and discussion, both on this committee, in my team, with the exec and his team, and also with our partners.
Okay.
Because a lot of times, those companies the intake process is through GCP, Jumpstart. So those 3 funds I mentioned,
Right.
while we still have loans that emanated from those funds, we are not actively lending through those funds. So those innovation funds currently are not defunct, but they're inactive with respect to them being a facility for us to deploy capital, if that makes sense.
It does. I just, through this process and exhausting as it has been, it would be natural perhaps to not be as open to
Yeah.
giving loans because of whether or not the return will be there or it's a higher risk and we certainly want to make sure that if there is a good business plan, that we
sure.
try to, bring them in and help them along and give them the resources they need.
Well, that question will be called soon enough, with the whole block land, city place innovation cluster, the innovation cluster that's being contemplated in Midtown. So this innovation assessment will give us some feedback on the capital position of this market, and I hope will define what role the public sector, and specifically the county, should play in that.
Right, and I think if I'm not mistaken, small business was also a big part of this program. I mean, it isn't just the big hitters.
Yes.
But it's the small business entrepreneur, the startup companies, those that may get involved with Greater Cleveland Partnership, those that walk in the door and have a business plan and an idea and want support, and we want to encourage them and do it in a way where the risk is higher.
Right.
Those are the ones that we,
Well, I'll give you an example, and Mr. Hurd can correct me. So one of the things this county approved in 2016 was a $50,000 loan loss reserve for the Capital Access Fund, which is being deployed, leveraging some capital from Morgan Stanley, but being deployed through the Urban League, where they provide the technical assistance.
right,
And in the worst case, so small and minority businesses primarily, none of that $50,000 has been accessed to date. And so they are now, because of the success of the program, they are coming back for to increase that because they have been able to leverage that capital with two of the local banks.
Okay.
So there's an example where
yeah,
they would argue the technical assistance, these are character-based loans primarily, and as a requirement, they have to get this technical assistance, that has prevented any losses. It's still early, so 2 years,
Right.
most of these companies are still getting off the ground, but there would be an example. But I think the question is going to be in these kind of high-tech, very innovation-related industries,
right,
where the risk is going to be higher by default. Just with a 1-to-10 ratio, something like that, of
right.
success to failure. That's where we'll have to really be thoughtful.
Just don't want to lose the small business,
Yeah.
you know.
I appreciate your comment.
Yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely. There will be losses, there will be accounts that go bad, and that's part of the acceptance that goes with this. And we just should have the acceptable level to which we're prepared to go forward with the expectation that there's gonna be some winners and some home runs along the way too.
And I guess I'll just, Mr. Chairman, with your permission, just go back to Councilwoman Baker's comment. That's really why we structured this testimony this way, to recharacterize what was not mischaracterized, but was not sufficiently unpacked in the press around the loans that were really problematic. Those programs were designed to be high risk. So they were designed to make bets, hopefully see some successes, of which there are some, but
Right.
so default rate is going to be higher. But I don't think, and one of the entities said, well, we viewed that as a grant, not as a loan. So there was a lot of misperceptions about how those programs are structured. And I think one of the lessons learned from this is we've got to be clear in setting expectations, loan, grant, and what the performance is on the other side of our capital being provided.
Right,
And
and
that
then
will-
also along with that, our internal structure is billing, is communicating, we have internally that folder that we can pull out and make sure we understand what that business is doing, with down to the letter. That's where I
Yes.
think on our part, we have done better.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
the
there's
objection was
always
never
gonna be
on
risk.
the risk, the type of loan, any of those things, even the personal guarantees. The objection of this committee was, you couldn't pull out a piece of paper and tell us what was going on with that activity. That was where the objection is, and I think probably, I'm echoing the IG, it wasn't that we're gonna second guess, you picked ABC company, and they went belly up. Okay, that happens. It was that you could not produce a piece of paper that showed ABC, here it is, here's their personal guarantee, here's what they did. And that's where I think both the IG and this committee. So now that we've got that behind us, go get them. And go get them with the programs out there. I think Mrs. Baker was just worried that because we brought scrutiny, well, scrutiny should never have an impact on good quality programs. I mean, the fact I'm gonna hold you accountable, well, shame on us for not holding you accountable before. It's not, so that's, and if I'm a business and you're not gonna send me an invoice, I ain't gonna pay, more than likely. You don't rely on me to remember to pay you, because I got the other people who are sending me invoices.
No, 100%.
So I think that was the big IG, and that was this committee's, and I think I'm glad we got that behind us. That if we go and ask for loan 186, you're gonna be able to pull out loan
Yes.
186 and hand it to us.
Yeah, so I can't emphasize enough, this result is the work of an incredible number of people. So let me just take the privilege of just introducing the full team
Sure.
behind me.
Go for
Mentioning
it.
a couple of others. So Brian Edwards, you met, who's a loan portfolio manager. Sona Lahoti Kandawal, who is the assistant loan portfolio manager. Michael May, Paul Herdick, and I can't say enough about Paul. He's just stepped in this process multiple times, wearing multiple hats. Former Deputy Chief Greg Huth, our E&Y team, the edit team, there's just the executive who early in the days was really focused on this and still is. And the Inspector General has been a good partner as well. And so you all have been patient, giving us time to just get this to a place of goodness. Your council staff has stopped down. They understand the process. We did a Lean Six Sigma that they participated in to improve the billing process. So it's been a collective effort that it feels good to be able to give you answers rather than shrugging my shoulders.
Well, and another way that, because the media has been asking for these same pieces of information, I see we have some good friends from the media here. One way might also to give them a good warm fuzzy, and I know you're never supposed to be doing this in a pure public event, but it's, if you can ask them to go off the record and say, hey, come on in. Well, let us show you where we're going and what we've done, because we don't want the publicity of against somebody's personal business or whatever they are. You don't want to be scrutinizing what their, perhaps what their personal guarantees are and things of that nature. But they can feel comfortable that you can pull File 186, you can pull File 150, and give them and let them go off the record and actually walk them through something of that nature and give them that warm fuzzy, because I see my good friends back there from Cranes have asked before, and we don't do this to satisfy them. We do this because it's just good government, and we're satisfied that we're doing good government. Thanks.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, so the
Economic development.
second
Lenny,
question.
the economic development plan, is that the second half of where you're going?
Yeah,
Or no?
well, the second question, I'll jump to
sorry.
the economic development priorities, then I'll end with the pipeline. So you had, at the last hearing, a question about first half results, pipeline, the microgrid, which I'll cover in the economic development plan priorities. And then you asked about the metrics associated with the economic development plan. So Mr. Hurdick's going to talk to that as part of. I'm sorry? Mr. Miller's question. Yes. So I'll jump to item 3 and then come back to the pipeline. As the committee requested on June 24th, I will now outline the 5 priorities for the Department of Development actions under Cuyahoga County's 5-year economic development plan. The full plan covers activity by all partners of our economic development ecosystem. Within this range of activity, some are best suited for leadership and implementation by the Department of Development. A, workforce innovation and sector partnerships. Cuyahoga County has invested substantial time, energy, and money, with close to $1 million out of the Department of Development in the development of the current sector partnership initiative. We are beginning to see concrete actions in the manufacturing sector, as you heard last month, with the healthcare sector slated to begin operation by year end, and the information technology sector, including blockchain, probably scheduled for by the end of Q1 2020. We will continue to work to focus with county and outside actors on implementing this initiative to address the talent gaps in these sectors. Internally, the Department of Development has built out its skill-up operation to the point where significant numbers of businesses are directly engaged with our staff. The interventions we seek to apply have led a significant number of businesses to think and act differently as they approach the issue of organizational structure, talent sourcing, training, and retaining human capital. By spring 2020, all 3 sector partnerships will be in operation, and our Skill Up service will be on its way to its goal of engaging 5,000 businesses. B, opportunity zones through the prism of equity and inclusion. Working closely with the City of Cleveland, Greater Cleveland Partnership, the Gunn and Cleveland Foundations, as well as the Fund for Economic Future, the Department of Development coordinates work to leverage the federal opportunity zones tax incentive to drive investment in underserved neighborhoods across Cuyahoga County. Our work has been recognized nationally with a second visit from the White House Opportunity Zone leadership team later this week. As you recall, there are 64 census tracts that were identified as opportunity zones across the county, with 48 being in the City of Cleveland, 16 outside of the City of Cleveland. By spring 2020, we expect to work with our collaborative partners to support at least 20 opportunity zone projects with capital. Research done by the Fund for Our Economic Future demonstrates that systemic racial disparities continue to exist in earnings and employment. Gender disparities also continue to exist. While our major lending programs are open to all business owners, the Department of Development will continue to support activities specifically designed to support innovation, entrepreneurship, and employment in good jobs of those who are still at disadvantage. Our work includes funding minority business assistance programs, capitalizing loan funds directed towards growing minority businesses, and supporting the Innovative Paradox Prize competition, which seeks to overcome the distance discrimination barrier to employment of those who do not own private cars. We will be conscious of the need for substantive programs from an equity and inclusion standpoint across all of our programs. With respect to mobility and innovation, I've recently been named as the mobility lead by the Fund for Our Economic Future for our 18-county region to focus on transit mobility and connecting that to vehicular mobility. C, sustainability and the microgrid. As the county executive stated in his State of the County speech, actions to address climate change and use sustainable resources have positive economic impacts. The Department of Development is now taking an active role in promoting Cuyahoga County's sustainability work, including our first-to-market downtown microgrid. Last month, the executive met with key stakeholders, both developers and downtown Cleveland property owners, to begin to implement our initiatives to link sustainability and economic development, and to get their input. Incentives will be provided to economic development projects that create jobs accessible to public transit. County-funded real estate projects will be expected to include sustainable design features. The microgrid already shows promise to attract businesses to locate in downtown Cleveland. While I have not done a scientific survey, I can share anecdotally that several key members of the business community support the development of this asset and view it as a competitive advantage. During the All-Star Game, the executive briefed several national site selectors on the microgrid. Site selectors are consultants who represent businesses that are who identify sites and geographies to attract businesses to geographies like Cuyahoga County. One of the firms in particular made a point of positively commenting on the benefit of such a grid. Notably, during the recent All-Star Week, the site selection consultant visiting Cleveland stated publicly that the microgrid was a competitive advantage to helping distinguish Cleveland from other similar cities. This committee has also insisted that my office and I get closer to this project. That has happened. Going forward, I will be partnering with Mr. Foley throughout the rest of his process to ensure that a market test is done for this microgrid. So we will be participating, and I personally will be participating in this RFQ process. I will ensure that, again, there's a market test in the RFQ so that we can determine before any other major investment by the county is supported, that we understand what the business case is for the microgrid from the developers who we anticipate responding to that RFQ. D, innovation and entrepreneurship. New business formation, research, commercialization, and other support for innovation are fundamental to sustaining our county's economic growth. We are fortunate to have centers of innovation in our geography, including the NASA Glenn Research Center, our universities, and our 2 hospital systems. Access to the resources needed to start and grow an innovative enterprise is not uniform, and the Department of Development seeks to support initiatives that will make those resources more accessible to underserved populations. We will seek, in partnership with our Arizona Alliance, to attract federally recognized innovative startups to locate and grow here. Our goal is to have the attraction plan in place and to have at least one growing business within the next year. With respect to block land, we expect to support the new City Place site in 2020, and there's also emerging discussions on another biotech innovation cluster within the city that we foresee being involved in. E, housing program implementation. The Department of Development led Cuyahoga County's work with the Housing Coalition to create a robust housing policy. County Council has now authorized funding to carry out a housing program addressing the major issues identified by our housing policy. Work to implement the housing program is shared between the County Land Bank and the Community Development Division of Development. So in the last 2 weeks, we've had several meetings with the Land Bank to discuss how this program will be operationalized in a partnership manner. Our staff will devote substantial time and effort to begin to implement the elements of the housing program and monitor activity to ensure the activities are addressing identified needs. Goals for the housing program are being established jointly with our county land bank. I'm now going to ask Mr. Hurdick to just come up and round off the metrics part of the 5-year plan, and then we can, with your permission, Mr. Chair, we'll go to the item.
Yeah, before we get to the metrics, are there questions of any of your testimony from anybody? The one that just jumps out at me is this microgrid. It keeps getting classified as sustainability resources. I don't see solar being discussed. I don't see wind turbines being discussed. I see nothing but fossil fuel is the core of the entire microgrid. Without fossil fuel, it wouldn't exist because it's all gases that are pumped out of the ground that are making the Cleveland Thermal operational to make this microgrid work. So it just seems to me this has nothing to do with sustainability. This is an economic development play that should be in your department, and it belongs there. Either businesses are gonna sign on for it and pay a higher rate, or businesses are not gonna sign on for it. It's just that simple. I don't see a wind turbine turning, and I don't see a solar panel being utilized in the microgrid. It's Cleveland Thermal using the spill off of the natural gas to power their turbine blades that are then powering to make electricity. And unless I'm missing something, that's what I'm seeing, and it belongs in your department to be selling this to find somebody who's willing to pay for the power. Maybe Mr. Foley actually might have got it started, but my belief is it's either going to be an economic play and people are going to sign up and pay the additional cost differential between the two prices, or they're not, and it just comes down to that simple. As a matter of fact, I talked to somebody just today as a business that it could very well be something that they're willing to pay the additional price on it. So I think it's your play, not a sustainability play. But that's just my comments on it. Any comments in regards to anything on these topics, A through D, that were just discussed, or A through E even?
If I can also say
Get into the
too,
metrics.
I'm glad to see that you're involved in this, and I believe too it is an economic development. It seemed at the time it was too much in a silo of sustainability. There wasn't enough broad conversation with your department and theirs, but it looks like we've come to terms on that.
Yes.
And I would strongly encourage your involvement, as you say you're going to be. You did make a comment, though, that there would be perhaps investments made by the county. But I think Director Foley was pretty clear to say that this is the only investment, the one that we did with Cleveland State and another organization.
Mid-all, the consultant.
Right, there was about a $315,000 investment, 200 of which were donated through their grant. And so that's the extent of it, that we are not involved in the $100 million investment that we hope to have private sector.
That's correct. I misspoke, Councilwoman, you're correct.
Okay,
But that doesn't exclude the possibility that we could be enticing a business to come here and getting them to come here because, and the microgrid is a driving factor, that somebody wants that.
Right.
That redundancy in their power. And so there, the county could be playing a role, not in the grid, but in the inducement of getting a company here that wants to use that service. To me, that's where we belong as far as the economic development play.
right, I just don't want to see county funds supporting the microgrid when we've agreed upon this being 100% by those from the outside.
Yes.
Supporting it. We just can't, I mean, counties just
I
can't
guess
right
we
now.
have an open discussion. As long as we're not trying to say that a company that wants to come here.
Right.
Utilize the microgrid, and we want to induce them to be the first company to come here, I've got.
No, I don't have a problem.
That's not the same thing.
No.
It's not the cost of building the microgrid, but it could be somebody who is becoming our first dependent client within the microgrid that we would participate with.
Okay. Makes sense, yes.
Okay, I'm glad you're there, I'm glad you're
Okay.
involved. And
Any other
do you
comments or
accept,
questions?
just, do you accept the plan as written from this being you weren't really that heavily involved with the initial plan from sustainability? Are you broadening that, changing that before it goes out for an RFP?
When you say the plan, just,
Well, the plan that, that we're going to be going out and getting bids on, and, I mean, the 315,000 that's being spent right now, are you in agreement with how that the vision of what that is being spent on and the reasons that the sustainability is outlined?
What I will say is, Council, is that Mr. Foley and I are going to sit down and I'm going to dig into how he structured the RFQ, which I've not. What I've said to him is that having the private sector, particularly in this P3 model, which he has structured, which I think is a good one, see what the developer community says. If someone's willing to upfront the money to invest and create this, that's a good thing for the county.
Yeah.
And we'll know pretty soon whether someone's prepared to do that or not. So that, I'm comfortable saying, and some of the other details you may be alluding to,
Right.
I'll pause there, if that's fair.
That's fair.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Hurdick, you want to go through the metrics to keep Mr. Miller's checklist satisfied out there? That'd be fantastic.
Thank you. Paul Hurdig, the
Great
Department of
questions
Development.
he raised, by the way, and I think everybody is supportive of having metrics.
Great, thank you. And let me say, because it's baseball season, it's great to have the opportunity to have the table set so I can bat cleanup.
Okay, all right.
So I really have three
We didn't
things.
do that last night,
Three things.
unfortunately.
Yes, sir. We'll get better.
Our tribe left us a little sad, yes.
We'll get better. Three things I came up to speak to. The first is the question, the metrics. I do want to make sure staff has given everyone a printed copy. I have the larger ones, if yours are small. Do you have the small version?
Oh, yeah, that's a big one? Oh, good, okay.
Okay, I'll take that too. Thank you.
Although we're not going to take the time today.
There you go, you have glasses in.
Oh, thank you. I do want to note, I'm very heavily indebted to the team at Cleveland State University. Dr. Lendl's here with a member of her staff. We're not going to take the time today, but we're going to set up a separate opportunity, probably over at Cleveland State, for anyone who's interested to really dig into this in full detail. The 7 slides I gave you are part of a longer presentation. There's a lot of data behind it, but I have been working closely with them over the past year to try to make sure we have some high-level measures that make sense, that tie to our plan. So we have 7 things that we think make sense to look at, and we have some that can be projected forward and some where the data makes that a little more difficult. First one is an opportunity index. This is a combination of different kinds of measures that basically show how our population is doing: health, education, job opportunities, and so forth. It's possible to compare different counties by using the index. You can see on the chart before you, we're comparing how we rate against some of our peer counties in nearby states. And it's also possible to project out going forward, if things are not done differently, how this index will trend over time. So this gives us a basis to say, if we're going to try to intervene, do different things, where are we starting from? Where's our population going now? So the second top-level measure we look at is business starts. We were able, with the help of Cleveland State, to get some data that's not usually made public from the state of Ohio that lets us actually count how many new businesses get formed here in Cuyahoga County. And again, we've got hard data for the past several years, so we can then project out a trend line, again, without any interventions. This is what we'd expect to happen normally. It's a pretty good measure of innovation because business formation is one of the drivers there.
We have that broken down by the 3 sectors that we're targeting?
We can get that, and I don't have it here, but we can get that information.
Be nice
By looking
to
at
make
business
sure that
starts.
the startup businesses are in line with the 3 sectors we just picked as a county to fund and go forward with
Right, we can get that sector
as a
information.
percentage. Hopefully they're at least 1, 2, and 3 of our startups too.
Yes. The third thing we look at is a measure of business attraction. We have a lot more data than this, but just for high level, we look at data we get from Jobs Ohio that shows new businesses coming and businesses growing with the state support. We have a couple trend lines here because it's very difficult to project this. So here we're looking at a band, and we're also making sure we note that the 3,000 Amazon jobs may not be repeated every year. So we tease that out. The fourth thing we look at is a measure of how existing businesses grow. And again, we get some of this non-public data from the state, So we can actually look to see, based on actual filings businesses make with all their employees, how many companies that now exist are adding employees and how many employees they're adding. So the numbers we have here show us Cuyahoga, Franklin, and Hamilton. We have historical data going back about 5 years, and then we've got a trend line that projects out. In terms of the talent gap, we had hoped that the official Team NEO Aligning Opportunities report would be out by now. We just heard a presentation last week by the lady that's writing it. She said she's almost done. They've got the executive summary out, but the full data set is still to come. So in lieu of that, we also have a measure here that Cleveland State has put together. We're looking in the targeted sectors, we're looking at demand versus credentials. This is one aspect of the issue. It's not the whole issue, but it kind of gives you a measure of what our post-secondary institutions are turning out in terms of credentialed people and what industry says is the need. In terms of economic inclusion, we look at a statistic called labor force participation rate, which basically tells you out of all the folks in the age range 16 to 64 you'd expect to be working, how many are working or actively seeking work. And higher is better. So the point here is that there is an ongoing discrepancy between white and non-white. And when we talk about inclusion, we're looking for things that can help to close the gap so that over time, if we're making progress, this gap would get smaller. And then the seventh high-level measure is our population. It's easy to get the high-level numbers. The Census Bureau gives us statistics, but again, our economists at Cleveland State have broken this down and can provide much more detail in terms of age rates, because when we talk about having a workforce, we're looking at certain age bands where they're most likely to be involved in the workforce. But you can see here the trend line, if things continue, where Cuyahoga will not be favorable compared to some other counties. And we've had discussion already at the commission, Jack, and will continue to do so about things that ought to be done to try to reverse that. So what I've tried to do today is just give a flavor of the top level indicators. The question was asked at the last hearing, can you set targets for these? And I think my answer to this is absolutely, but this is a policy discussion. It shouldn't simply be coming from your staff saying, here it is. It should be a policy discussion, perhaps at the commission, informed by the data that comes from your staff, your economists, but then the discussion being, which of these do we want to move? Where would we like them to be in 5 years?
Paul, if you could lay the three sectors in that we've targeted onto each one of these charts, you can then hand that off to those three sectors that are working on it and say, okay, here's where we are, and here's our goal, and here's what we're going to try and achieve. Because I know that the manufacturing sector on that workforce area believes that the gap is 3,000 openings right now. And if they can close that down, the target I know within that group is 3,000 people working. So they intend to close it down to zero.
Great.
It's a big goal, but if each one of these could be done the same way and know where it's going, where it's trending, where the new businesses are coming in, where the business attractions coming in the three sectors we've targeted, it just says that we're either going to be successful or not based on what we've done. And if we can attract businesses into those three sectors, I mean, blockchain and the IT, if their numbers go off the chart on attracting business and people, that would be a measure of success, it seems to me. And it would map up with this. I'm a big fan of, if you tell me this is what you want your goals to be, then incorporate them into your data. Because we've already put $2.5 million into the three sector partnerships. That's going in there, so why not using that in all your measurements to see how's it gonna play? Because then we can come back in 3 years or 4 years and say, was that a good use of $2.5 million?
Great. So I'm looking back at our experts to confirm, to the extent possible, we'll absolutely do it by sectors, to the extent we can. Yes, sir.
Yeah, good. Any other questions?
Wait a minute.
Yep. Mr. Miller, you started us on this path, so in fairness, I'll let you make it.
Okay, well, on the opportunity index, can you tell me what that number consists of? How is that measured?
Certainly. And again, Councilman, we want to be careful not to use too much time going into gory detail, But there are 4 components to this, and in the so we include 4 elements: economy, education, community, and health. And just to give an example of the current rankings for us versus other counties, we here in Cuyahoga in 2018 were ranked at 47.9 on economy. There's a number of factors that go into that. We were, again, lagging behind Allegheny, Franklin, Hamilton, and even Marion County, but we were ahead of Wayne County, Detroit. And we can provide, we'll get to you the full detail, or in the longer briefing we're going to arrange. Second component is education, where we have a number of things that go into education. The third one is some measures of community strength, and the fourth is a measure of health. And in each of the areas, we have detailed numerical rankings, which we stack up and combine them and then rank them against our peer counties.
So is 47.9 our combined score at this point?
That's for the economy, and then the opportunity score comes out to 49.
49, okay. And looking at each of these, my intuition is that some of these would be more responsive to our direct efforts than others. Do you have any sense of which of these we can actually move the needle on substantially due to our direct efforts in the county, and which ones are less amenable?
Right. So given that this supports an economic development plan, the areas that we will work in most directly are the economy areas, where we'll be discussing resources for business formation, job creation, so that employment would increase and business formation would increase. The education is beyond the span of control of an economic development plan, although the county itself and many other actors are addressing education issues, and they can't be separated from workforce issues, which are also being addressed. You know, health is, again, a separate system. The caveat being that if employment increases, if more folks are working, we'll have better access to health care. There may be improved health outcomes, but we're not intending to directly address economic development funding into the health system. I hope that's to some extent helpful.
And Mr. Miller, not to get too far ahead of it, but I know on August 20th, the manufacturing sector is going to have an event at 7:30 in the morning. And I can tell you that all 4 of these are being discussed actively within that sector because they believe that they do have an ability to touch health if people are being employed. HR departments are asking about the community, if we can hire those folks coming back from penal institutions and hiring special needs kids and doing things of that nature, it will affect the community, and obviously the education and economy will be direct impacts of those things.
So, Director, I appreciate that answer, but I was actually asking that question in relation to all 7 of the metrics that you put forward here about to what extent they're potentially responsive to our efforts.
Certainly, Councilman, the traditional economic development activities are more narrowly focused on business attraction, business expansion, providing capital to business for growth. But we have taken on the challenge of population. This is something that our Economic Development Commission has said quite clearly needs to be addressed. And for that reason, the issue with population is determining which interventions that are both feasible and can happen will either retain or even bring back those working age folks whose talents we're missing here. Just for example, these are not new, but need to be emphasized: retention of college graduates, more robust internship programs to attract the recent college graduates, and even the concept which Destination Cleveland has brought to us of going to find our expatriates in other cities and trying to sell them on coming back to Cleveland. So our ED Commission has seen this as part of its mission, because without a population, we don't have the workforce.
And Director, final question. Does the administration intend to have that policy discussion and establish targets for these metrics? And if so, what's the time frame on that?
Councilman, I can only state that my recommendation is that this be ongoing work for the ED Commission over the next year, and that we would recommend as staff the information the commission needs to give us that policy guidance within the next year.
Then picking up on Mr. Miller's point, then why don't we just go ahead and schedule 6 months from now and tell us where we are in all 7 of these points?
We would certainly, as oversight, we would come before this committee and
Right,
give that report.
let's just plan 6 months from this date. We'll schedule it down and tell us that we've started to do things in growth of existing business, or we've done this. I wouldn't expect it, we've moved any needles. I would only expect that the thought process will have started to be implemented.
Good, thank you.
If, Ashley, if you can put that on the calendar, 6 months from this date, that we will have an update on the programs as far as the indicators and projections. Thanks. And it doesn't mean that anybody anticipates here that in 6 months you will have moved the needle that's going to be identifiable. All you can expect is that the steps will have been taken to start the process out there. And some of them might have been taken by the sector partnerships that we're standing up and letting them know that these are what we're going to be measuring as a county. So make sure they get built into what Magnet and GCP are doing, what hopefully the next healthcare will be doing, and things of that nature. Yes, Scott?
Thank you, through the chairman. I'm glad you spoke to the population issue. Obviously, in Cuyahoga County, that's a problem. My question to you is, through this study, when you're doing comparisons to similarly situated counties, so if the other counties have higher population, aren't these other factors going to already, aren't they going to start at a higher level than Cuyahoga County would to begin with? I mean, isn't population the driver in all of this?
So, Councilman, I, to some extent, have to defer to my experts who really crunch the numbers, but the intention is to control for all variables and tease out what is different here and elsewhere, so that, yes, you have more people, you have more gross domestic product, more businesses, but some of the statistics we look at are ratios where we can compare cities of different sizes to see how they're doing in comparison.
So cities in each county then?
Well, counties of different sizes, I apologize.
Oh, I'm sorry, you said county,
But to
okay.
the extent that we're looking, for example, at an unemployment rate, we're not just counting numbers of people, we're looking at percentages. So when we talk about labor force participation, it's percentages, not just raw
So
numbers.
ratios in each individual, yeah, okay, all right, that makes sense. Okay, thank you.
And I would assume that you mean like a rate of change. If we're at 10 and somebody else is already at 12, yeah, they're 2 points ahead of us on a particular delta. But if we move our 10 to 11 and their 12 goes to 12.1, our rate of change would have been at a faster pace. That's
correct.
And which is what our objective could be. And eventually we'll get past them and off we go. Yes, Ms. Baker?
Yes, what's jumping out at me is this workforce development talent gap. We have here demand versus credentials, and then you have Bachelor of Arts plus grads and healthcare Bachelor of Arts. Do we recognize that there are short-term programs, short-term training, incumbent training, certifications, things that perhaps our high school students don't have to go to a full Bachelor of Arts degree in order to qualify of getting into an IT, healthcare, manufacturing? How can you perhaps change this to make it a more realistic picture of those that may not have the full credentials, but certainly have enough to get into these fields?
Thank you, Councilwoman. One of the most challenging data issues we face is there isn't good reporting of non-degree credential programs. There just isn't. There's some reasons for that. One reason is that we have a very traditional K-12 bachelor's, associates, reporting system and structure. The second reason is that there's not a federal system in place that requires everyone to do uniform reporting. So that's a huge challenge that researchers face, which is just trying to understand what the data is. Our sector partnerships, I know, are digging into that as well. Our workforce boards work in that area. There's efforts to have some uniform credentialing, but it's even in our office, our own staff, our skill-up staff have had to invest considerable time just doing the research because it doesn't exist. But we certainly understand that a complete picture should be actually matching the credentials that are needed against what the credentials that exist. And that's a goal we try to work towards.
Okay, so it is on your radar. You're trying to, I mean, that could drastically change this picture here.
Yes.
If you were to include a 6-month credential program or a 1 year or even an incumbent program or an ongoing, educational learning program. All that could be much different than a Bachelor of Arts.
Yes.
Okay, that I'd like to also hear in 6 months.
Councilman, I can't promise the data is going to be that quickly got better, but it's something we're all trying to work on getting better data.
And I can assure you that the manufacturing sector is looking very much at that. I've always joked about that. I would much rather have somebody who is credentialed in how to fix my servers than I would the guy with a double E graduating from a high-end university. If the one is certified to run a Cisco server and get that server up and running to make my business run. Not that the other person not capable of learning it, but I'll take the one who's certified on my Cisco routers to make it operational. Other questions? Like we said with the loan program, the loan program has been at this for 1.5 years. It's a great start. This too is the way to go. Yes.
So, Mr. Chairman, 2 other questions I wanted to answer were asked at June
Absolutely.
24th. There was a question about what we might expect to outcome of the Arizona Alliance work over the next year.
Okay.
And I am not prepared to give a hard number here because the work is still in the formation phase. And as Ted testified, one of our goals for the next year is to have that attraction plan finalized and underway. But what I'd like to do is illustrate one effort that's underway that kind of uniquely takes advantage of the Arizona's assets. And the fact is, NASA's there. NASA Glenn is a great center of excellence of technology transfer. So between NASA Glenn, between the Ohio Aerospace Institute, which has used federal grants, we've matched some of that, between the Arizona Alliance itself, led by Stuart Mandel, there's a conscious effort underway to attract some 80 high-tech firms. They're in a program that's called SBIR. This is a special federal program that provides grants to early-stage firms to encourage their growth. So we've got 80 high-tech firms. They're not in the Arizona now, but they've all got a connection with NASA. And through Ohio Aerospace Institute, they're going to get free technical advice from NASA Glenn. Our part, through the Arizona Alliance, will be to use that connection to try to attract them to come here and grow here. We really don't know how many we'll get, but what I can tell you, we asked our folks at Cleveland State, well, is this worth doing? The answer was yes, because they looked at what they call their economic multipliers. They used their in-plan system. And because of the nature of this work, for every job these companies bring in, we get as many as 3 total jobs, supply chain jobs, what are called induced jobs. So that's an area where we're focusing effort over the next year, and it plays into the county's innovation entrepreneurship strategy. So once again, we hope in a year's time to be able to give more definitive data on that. Certainly Arizona's important to us. And the final question was a question about what might we expect to see in terms of outcomes from the Opportunity Zone tax advantage. Here again, it's hard to be definitive. We did have one of our staff do a quick look at 12 projects that were already publicly disclosed through an online platform. This is something we've worked on with Greater Cleveland Partnership, City of Cleveland, an effort to have entrepreneurs bring their projects forward and match them up with funding. So we just took a look at 12 projects that were in the platform. We said, look at the industries these are in, look at the nature of their project. What if they all got funded? What would the result be? And again, I want to be careful. This is not a promise or projection, But just looking at those 12 projects, we could account for about 925 construction jobs, 175 new permanent jobs. Then when you apply the multipliers, the economic multipliers, it could be about 1,741 jobs from construction and 237 permanent jobs all told. So it's just an illustration of the possible impact of this tax advantage. I will say, in the early going, we're seeing more real estate than business, and we're trying to change that because we think the intent of the program was to try to get capital into businesses in underserved communities. So some of the things we're working on are trying to leverage some possible county money into a larger pool of money that would specifically invest in businesses. This, again, is an area where we'll have to update the committee as it develops.
Well, seeing how you just listed 2, let's make that 3 and tell us what the status of microgrids are in 6 months also.
We will return.
Because it's right on all 4 with your reference to the Aerozone and the jobs you think could be correlated to that. It's right on par with the Opportunity Zone and the jobs you were just alluded to. So let's track down if the county's gonna be part of a microgrid, identify what jobs in 6 months at the same time. Ashley, if you could have the microgrid on there also in 6 months, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions? Yes, sir, Mr. Miller.
Mr. Chairman, and maybe this is a question for the director.
That means that this is a question for the director. The word maybe
yeah,
was
yes.
just a modifier to
Getting
the
comfortable
sentence.
there.
My question is, I appreciate what you put forward in terms of the statement of the 5 primary objectives and the more detailed information on the 7 metrics. And my question is, if you would be supportive if we were to prepare amendments that incorporated these 2 things into the economic development plan.
The 2 things you just covered with Mr. Hurdick?
Right.
Sure, I have no problem with that, Mr. Chairman.
And what my intention, I'm sure because of our timeline that you want to move this out today.
And that's the very last thing before we finish this
You
meeting.
know, so my intent would be that these would be prepared as amendments to be offered at the council meeting, but I would like to have your blessing to do so.
I have no problem with it, Mr. Miller. I'd love to see them, the fine print, but that makes sense.
In the alternative, though, there's also the possibility that we say, okay, we've all agreed, this is the dance card, here's where we're gonna go, see how you do this year, and then build them into next year's plan, because it does have to have an annual review based on the way the charter is written. So I'll talk with Mr. Miller following that, but at least conceptually, we're all in agreement that metrics are good things. People perform to metrics, and we go forward with that.
And I think, Mr. Miller, you did something similar last year. We did an amendment of, I can't remember
We did,
exactly what
yes,
it was, but
yeah,
it was
I
something
just-
along the same lines.
I just know we also have a timeline that we have to hit for purposes of the charter, and
Okay.
we want to stay on line with that.
I actually think in this case, we're in much better shape because you have it right here. I think what you presented to us is fine, and it's simply a matter of taking that, finding the right places in the report and just grafting it in the forms of amendments. So I think we basically have it ready to go.
Okay,
An
now I
alternative
understand
would be
better
to
what you-
build the metrics as an appendix and say, these are the metrics to which this plan is gonna be used, so you can have it as a tear-out sheet, and we can put a scorecard on it and not have to go looking through the document to find where it is, and just have it as an appendix and just pull it off like you do over to the baseball and give you a scorecard every.
With your permission, Mr. Chairman, I'm just thinking on my feet here. One thing I would like to do is maybe have the benefit, since we do the process that Mr. Miller suggested, that would be at the next council meeting. We could at least get his language, send it out
Sure.
to the commission as a courtesy, because we really write this plan in concert with the commission. So they adopt it. It's the commission's plan technically, and so that they, are in concert with what the council's input is, and then we can, just close that base if that is.
Well, the
okay with
logistics, we'll work on the logistics behind the scenes to get the steps taken. We have one last action. There is a resolution, it's been read. The chair will take the prerogative of moving it to the full council meeting for approval. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded.
Mr.
Any
Chairman.
further discussion? Does it need to have a second reading suspension at the next meeting? Or our next meeting is, we only have one more meeting in August. I think we do have to have, it has to be read with the second, with the intent of suspension of the rules of our second meeting. So I will, if the seconder will accept that?
Yes.
Thank you, okay. So we'll be presented with for second reading suspension. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you very much. Making good progress. Appreciate it. If there's nothing further for the council, this committee is adjourned.